Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing birth through 5, child development and when to be concerned. Our session objectives are first to review typical and atypical stages of young children's development. And by atypical, we just mean different. We have a general idea of how children develop at specific ages, and then there are some children that develop differently or not as expected. We're going to discuss the referral and evaluation processes when there is a concern for young children's development. And then we're going to understand when children are eligible for services and what those services look like. So this is just a great image to get us started about the human brain development, and it focuses on that early part. You'll see the pink shaded box is actually the whole first year of life. And then this red line goes all the way up through age 5. So we see from birth through 5, we actually develop more from a brain perspective than we do from 5 until we leave. So it is super critical that the exposure in children get in those early years form so much of learning to happen next. So this is a quick snapshot, and you can go to this link and read it. It's from the Center on the Developing Child through Harvard University. Early experiences affect the quality of that architecture of the brain by establishing either a sturdy or a fragile foundation for all learning, health, and behavior that follow. And here I think is one of the most important parts. In the next few years of life, more than 1 million new neural connections are formed every second. And it really talks about sort of use it or lose it. And those connections in the brain that are not nurtured in that beginning stages are not formed as strongly. So it's so important that we're focusing on those early years in development, because that is really what creates that brain structure for the rest of children's development. So here's a good graph that just shows a little snapshot at different ages of a young child's early development. And this comes from the CDC developmental milestones. All of the links are in the bottom of the presentation, and they'll also be at a slide at the end. And again, what we like to talk about is just some general guidelines. So it doesn't mean that all children at 6 months are doing all of these things, but this is kind of a general roadmap as it's portrayed for different ages in a child's development and what we're generally expecting them to do in multiple areas of development. And why is tracking child development so important? Because parents' knowledge of child development supports children being ready for school. And if your child is showing atypical development, there are free services to help them catch up. So again, a reminder that atypical is really just showing some differences in development. So they may not be as where they expected to be at certain ages. So we're going to go through a few slides of just some different ages between birth through 5, just to give you a sampling of what we're looking for, what's really expected at those different ages. So at 6 months old in the social emotional category, we're looking for if children like to play with others, especially parents. They're responding to other people's emotions, and they often seem happy. In the area of language and communication, they're responding to sounds by making sounds. So very early signs of conversation. They're making sounds to show joy and displeasure. And we'll jump a little ahead to 18 months. In the social emotional category at 18 months, we're looking at children, they're playing simple pretend play, such as feeding a doll. They're pointing to show others that they're interested in something. In language and communication, by 18 months, that's really starting to build. So children are typically saying several single words by 18 months. They may even be putting a couple words together. They say and shake their head no. They're going to point to show someone what they want. They're going to show interest in a doll or a stuffed animal by pretending to feed them. So they're starting to kind of act out the everyday scenarios they go through, such as eating, in pretend play. And they can follow one step, we say commands, really directions, without any gestures. So for example, when you say sit, they'll sit down. At 3 years old, takes turns in games. Often children at 3 years old show concern for a crying friend. They understand the idea of mine or his and hers, and they're showing a variety of emotions. And that's really why when we talk about, we used to say those terrible twos, between two and even into the threes, children are connecting so much at the brain level. They're understanding so much of what's going on around them, and they're wanting to be a part of it. That sometimes they show those wide range of emotions because they don't yet have all the language to be able to either ask questions or say what they're thinking or say what they want. So that's really where we see more of those different range of emotions. So some of that's very typical, depending on their age, and then depending on how they're able to kind of calm down or problem solve from that. So in language and communication at 3 years old, we're looking our children following instructions with 2 or 3 steps. Are they understanding words like prepositions, in, on, under? And they talk well enough for strangers to understand them most of the time. So if we're hearing a 3-year-old and they're trying to talk or they're talking, but it's not clear to somebody, then that might be what we're calling that atypical development. Because at 3, they're mostly getting out words in a way that others can understand them. And they're starting to carry on a conversation using 2 to 3 sentences. So at 4 years in that social emotional category, they enjoy doing new things. So at 4, they're pretty comfortable with those routine things, right? They know the things that they've been doing consistently, but now they're getting comfortable and enjoying new experiences. They'd rather play with other children than by themselves. So typically what we see is this is a very social age. They're learning a lot from each other and they're wanting to play with others. They're wanting to share that joy. They're wanting to cooperate with other children. Again, not 100% of the time. We think of young people as young people, right? And as adults, we're not cooperative 100% of the time. So we're not looking for that in a 4-year-old, but we're looking that they're showing interest in that, building cooperation and playing with others. They talk about what they like and what they're interested in. In language and communication, they're understanding the idea of counting. They start to understand time, remember different parts of a story, and they're understanding the idea of same and different. This is what we talk about, different concepts that start forming at 4 years old. So they're really not just naming or playing with objects, but they're learning about objects. They're also starting to play board games or card games, and they can tell you what they think is going to happen next in a book, predicting. So how to learn more about your children's development. There is a milestone tracker app through the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And again, the link is in the PowerPoint, and we will also have a companion document to this PowerPoint up on the Family Academy site. And you can go to any of these links to explore more. And this tracker is wonderful because you're able to select different children's age, and right away it'll pop up some of those examples I just shared, what they should be doing at different stages in development. So what support is there for children who are developing what we say atypically? So maybe at different stages. All children and youth in the United States of America are protected under federal laws through the U.S. Department of Education. And we're going to talk a little bit about this law just so you have an idea of what those protections are and then how the school system comes into play with being able to support children who are under 5, so they're not yet ready for school, but if they're showing these delays in development, what kinds of services are available to them. So it's called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also called IDEA or IDEA. And again, it is a federal law that makes available free and appropriate public education to children with disabilities. And so when we say disabilities, that atypical development could be what we call a developmental delay. Sometimes atypical development can come from more of a medical diagnosis if a child was born with a disability. And so there's a law that says, let's look at what those needs are if they're not developing on track as we would for other children of that age, and what kinds of services can we provide. There's 2 parts to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. One is what's called Part C, and that is for our youngest children, so birth through 3 years old, and that's also referred to as the Infants and Toddlers Program. And then Part B is our 3 to 5-year-olds, also known as early childhood special education. Part B of IDEA actually goes through age 21, but when we're talking about birth through 5, we're talking about our students that are 3 to 5 years old. So if you have concerns for your child's development, you can make a referral and trained educators or therapists will arrange to meet you and your child. So we're going to talk through a little bit about how that looks for both Part C and Part B. So referring a young child for a possible delay in Part C, and that is birth through 2 years, 10 months, because starting at 3, we're going to look at that Part B program. Parents can complete an online referral, and this is the link where you would go. And then a team from the school system will schedule a time to come to your home and hear your concerns and conduct an assessment of your child. So that's going to involve talking with you. What are your concerns as a parent? And then also observing and playing with the child. We say assessment at that age, it's not a test that we would think of for older children. It's more play-based and presenting different toys and objects to the children to see how they're interacting with them or see what they're understanding and responding to. If your child is found eligible, he or she will receive services through what we call the Infants and Toddlers Program, or ITP, through an Individualized Family Service Plan, also referred to as an IFSP. And in some future videos, we're going to talk about what that looks like, because services in Part C and Part B do look different. Again, all guided by that federal law, IDEA. And so in some future ones, we'll talk about what does it look like to get services through ITP. But right now, we're just talking about the different ways that children at these different ages could get services. And then referring a young child for a possible delay in Part B, which is going to be that closer to 3 years old. So 2 years and 10 months up to 5 years old. Parents, again, can complete an online referral. And then a team from the school system will contact you to schedule a screening and potential evaluation of your child. So how it looks different in Part C and Part B is that usually in Part C, our evaluators are going to go out to your home and work with a child in their natural environment. For Part B, we'll invite you to come to one of our offices that's very child-friendly, where we can, again, see how the child is interacting with different materials and different toys, and also get some more information from you. If your child is found eligible for Part B, he or she will receive services in either a school-based or community-based setting and through an individualized education program, or called an IEP. So both of these, the IFSP and the IEP, are individualized documents, and they're going to be based on that individual child's needs. So as we started the presentation, we looked at what we're expecting kind of generally all children to do at certain ages. And then we start getting more specific and saying, well, this is how this particular child is doing. And those plans are really very customized to where your child is at in their development and how we can help them to build some skills that they may not be showing yet or maybe need more support in. So will my child receive services before they are school age? Yes, if they are found eligible for services based on their stages of development. So we want to talk a little bit about what that eligibility process is. And again, you would get more of this information once you start the process. So if you have concerns, you make a referral. Once somebody reaches out to you from the school system, they're going to talk to you a little bit more about this process. But just to kind of give you an overview. Eligibility under Part C in our Infants and Toddlers program in Maryland, an infant or toddler is eligible for early intervention through infants and toddlers if they have a 25% delay in at least one or more 5 developmental areas. And those are cognitive, how the child is thinking or understanding, physical, that their physical movement, vision and hearing, communication, social or emotional. So again, how they're not just showing emotions, but then how they're able to kind of regulate through those emotions, how they're interacting with others. And then the last is adaptive, which are kind of those everyday skills, right? So feeding and dressing, things that we eventually are going to learn to do for ourselves at different stages of the young child's life. They're starting to show interest or ability to do some of those. So that's another area that we look at. It manifests as an atypical development or behavior in one or more of those 5 areas. It interferes with their current development and is likely to result in a subsequent delay. And so again, that's kind of saying we're really going to take an individual look at the child and how they're doing overall. So it's not just looking at each of those areas in and of themselves, how they're all working together and are they interfering overall development. And the third way would be if the child has been diagnosed with either a physical or mental condition that has a high probability of resulting in a developmental delay. And again, some of those are evident at birth, and some of those can be diagnosed later, but through early development. And the eligibility under Part B, special education, is a preschool age child is eligible for early childhood special education if, through that evaluation process, the student meets criteria for 1 out of 13 disability categories under that federal law we talked about, IDEA, that negatively impacts their ability to learn. So again, we're going to have another session after this that will be posted up on Family Academy that's going to look at those different disability categories. So we're not going to get into all of those here, but there are 13 according to that federal law. And through that evaluation process, if we gather enough information and we determine that the child is eligible for one of those and it's negatively impacting their ability to learn, then they would be eligible for what we call special education. Another thing we have to look at is that determination is not a result of lack of instruction in reading or math or limited English proficiency. So we're really looking at, it's an actual impact on their development and ability to learn. And then that determination is based on, and this is a quote right from the federal law, that we have to take in information from a variety of sources. So including those tests, which we often call assessments at that younger age, parent input, teacher recommendations. So if your child is in a daycare center, we might also want to either observe them there or get their teacher's input, as well as information about the child's physical condition, social cultural background, adaptive behavior. So it's really intended to kind of take a pretty comprehensive look at the child, the whole child, and in contrast to kind of what we're looking for children to do at those certain stages of development. So what will education services look like for my young child? So depending on their individual needs, which are again determined by that evaluation process, young children may receive the following through either the IFSP when they are in infants and toddlers or an IEP once they turn 3 years old. And that can be special education, also sometimes referred to as specialized instruction, speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, or others as needed. So that could include hearing or vision support, depending on what the child's needs are. So here's a way to get a hold of us. This is our Birth Through 5 department through Anne Arundel County Public Schools. There's our phone number. If you had any further questions or you could not access any of the links that are on the next slide, feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Here are the references. These are the ones that were linked earlier in the slides. And if you go to each of them, they'll give you some more information. I always encourage families to go to the links and just kind of explore a little bit, especially that CDC Milestone Tracker app. If you're curious about your child's development or concerned that they might not be developing on time, that's a great app to use just kind of as a reference. And then the 2 different links to being able to do referrals through our school system. So we do hope this was helpful for you. Again, reach out to us if you have any questions and look for more information coming up soon through Birth Through 5.